Hello and welcome to Inflection Point Conversations. I'm Michelle Obeda, an art director and 3D artist. In this podcast series, I'll be interviewing experts in the fields of art, architecture, and visualization. Together, we will take a deep dive into the disruptive topics that have reached an inflection point in our industry. If you're enjoying this podcast, I'd love it if you could take a moment to like, rate, and subscribe, and comment and give feedback if you want. I'd love to reach out more people and grow this amazing community. Today, I'm talking with Mengyi Fan. Mengyi is currently the Director of Visualization at Shop Architects. She graduated with a Master in Advanced Architectural Design from Columbia University. She's worked in multiple roles of expertise in the architectural field, with a focus on the New York area, ranging from lighting design for major infrastructural projects to creating exhibitions that utilize social media as a tool. Mengyi has played a role in almost every project at the firm, working closely with partners and teams and using visualization as a design tool to realize Shop's architectural vision. She's an ambassador on behalf of Shop for NVIDIA's RTX program, using cutting-edge technology to further applied R&D in real-time visualization and mixed reality. Mengyi is also a co-organizer of 3DNY, working together with architecture, visualization, and VFX studios to promote diversity and facilitate conversations among different fields. Welcome, Mengyi.
Hi, thanks for having me, Michelle. It's great to be here.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. I've been really excited to get you on and talk to you about stuff. I mean, I feel like you have such a rich and interesting experience. And yeah, I'd love to pick your brain. So let's get started. I mean, what got you interested in architecture in the first place?
Well, long story short, my father worked as an architect for a long time.
Mm.
Well, I guess like back then I was more into art and studio arts and things like this. And like I think since the age of three, like there's actually a painting I did when I was 3 years old in the apartment.
Wow.
But I've always been drawing and liking arts and things like this. And I thought like for a long time I was going to go into studio arts, right? And then, it's just a really tough industry to get into. He was working as an architect, and he was just like, "Hey, there's like a lot of similarity between what you're interested in, and also like, these sort of more like technical but still creative fields. And you can really, I mean, pun intended, build something from this, and there's going to be, a work that's going to be bigger than you in the future." And so I was like, okay, let's give this a shot. And it was really fun. It was really engaging for me. And there was something about being able to use creative energy to design something, but also like have this sort of more technical side to things where you're actually specifying things, you're working with bigger teams, you're understanding how systems work, and you understand like basically the holistic approach to creating this large piece of work, that
Mm.
has been really, really fulfilling to me. And so I did an undergrad degree in architecture. I guess I liked it so much. I also did a master's in architecture. But yeah, it's been a good time.
Yeah. And then how did you transition from architecture to visualization?
I feel like I guess that maybe also like it pulled a little bit from like those like earlier days in my, history where I loved art so much. And I feel like, in the end it became this sort of perfect blend between what I was doing and what I wanted to do.
Mhm.
In which, I think it was critical and super important for me to actually understand the more pragmatic and practical side of how architecture worked and the effort that it involved and the roles everybody played in the projects, but also to bring more of that visual creativity back into the fields and understand that maybe if I'm not necessarily liable for the building falling down or standing up, to put it simply, it would be more freeing and more enjoyable for me, and
Mhm.
involves more of that sort of creative visual process. And so I've wore a lot of hats during sort of my career. So, early on, I was working in like, construction documents, like on site. I was like reviewing hardware details. But at the same time, I was working at a lighting company for a while. Domingo
Mhm.
Gonzalez in New York, and we were doing a lot of studies with light, and it was, it was very beautiful, I think, to be able to like visualize this kind of stuff. And then I went into another series of projects where I was doing more exhibition design, with Audi, with LVMH, and that also required this sort of kind of connection between visualization and fabrication. So because we were doing exhibition design, like our project periods were maybe like 4 to 6 months maximum. So
Yeah.
like, the day one is conception, and then by the 6th month you're already opening. And so we had
Yeah.
these like sort of very like complicated and short turnarounds that required like visualization and fabrication to go hand in hand.
Mhm.
And so like slowly, like, every single element, and for like all these projects and like companies, I was doing some level of visualization within it. I think it's very important to, have that visualization to be able to speak to a project and to explain the project. And
Yeah.
so I think once I really got into it, like I like got in connection with like shop, and they were looking for someone to fulfill this role. And I was like, okay, let's just give this a shot. Like, I've
Yeah.
been doing this for so long, like, let's just see how far we could take it.
Yeah. And then you started working for Sharp about 10 years ago, right? Like
12 now, yeah.
12 years ago, and you started
Yeah.
as as the director of the
I
visualization
have
department.
been, I have been, I think at the time it's like I was a director of one, which is
Hmm.
myself. And when I started, it was the week that Barclay Center had opened. And
Wow.
so shop went from basically being, a small kind of more boutique local, like New York based firm suddenly into like, okay, we're everywhere, right? And
Mm. And such an
so
iconic building that they
yeah, so it's
that
just
they
I think
started.
like once it just like opened the floodgates. So I started where, we had maybe just a few projects, and then things just like started really, really ramping up very quickly
Hmm.
from that first year. And suddenly it's like we need a team, we need like more teams to support the first team, we need to explore these things. And so it grew very, very quickly.
Yeah.
But I feel like it's definitely it's been an evolution. Like, the work I do and that we do 12 years ago is not the same as we do now. And I think that's definitely for the better, that like we're always like evolving and changing and trying to reposition ourselves and, the conversation of where things are moving in terms of not just visualization, but also technology and architecture.
Yeah. It's very interesting you were talking about the sort of in the lighting design company, the fastish but fast turnaround of 6 months for a project, and visualization, you got to see your visualization help make this thing which you also got to see resolved, versus working on an architectural project. You can work on it for years, and you have to wait a long time to see the results in the end. And then when you work in the studio, you normally have like quick turnaround projects, but you're just doing the visuals, and then you don't, you're not part of the end result really until maybe you see it a few years later,
I actually, no, I mean, I think we do it a little bit differently in that regard.
Mhm.
Like, there are projects maybe where I think, especially with larger developments, where, for instance, we're kind of on really to create like, kind of the equivalent of flavor text, like just to provide that initial like concept design. And then,
Mhm.
which I think is very typical of architecture studios, where especially if you're working with the developer and us, we would work together to find like a third party rendering studio who would help produce all the visuals for the marketing things.
Mhm.
But also, I think there's a lot of projects, and I think Shop very much prides itself in having these kind of very diverse and productive in-house teams where
Mhm.
we're doing visuals from day one all the way to marketing. And that's like, it's a long process. So there's definitely projects where that I've been on where I'm like, are we finally done? Because we've been working
Yeah.
on it maybe consistently for like 8 years.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
like, I think now it's changing a little bit with all the new software and like the sort of ease of access that people have. But for a long time, like, we weren't just doing like the hero shots of an image, but we were also working with the design teams through like facade details, through lighting details, through
Yeah.
understanding site and like to go through design iteration. So it's, I think visualization and model making and fabrication are a really huge part of the office. So it's never like we just come in, we do this one thing for a week and then we're out, but there's times when we're working with the team for months at a time. And like, especially for projects that are in the works, maybe for, like 8 to 10 years, like at times we're probably one of the only remaining like links to like the origin of the project. And so I
Hmm.
think like, especially the visualization team, because we work with almost every single team in the office and we work on every single project, we have kind of this large like body of knowledge of like the shop archive, so to speak.
Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you get like an overview of all the projects. And so you think visualization is quite critical in communicating design intent for an architecture?
I think so. I definitely think so. I mean, it's like I feel like all the tools right now, right? Like especially, the tools like Enscape or Lumion or Twinmotion are really about like giving architects the tools to visualize very quickly. And it's almost like the visual equivalent to, when back in the day when you're coding and you have like the what you see is what you get format. So, you type in your HTML and you generate a live web page at the same time. I think it's that. And I think like it's just about like quick iteration because especially, it's funny because I think we always think of a lot of viz as sort of that like early concept phase, just create the idea. But it really
Mhm.
becomes critical later down the line when, for instance, they want to explore how maybe a material reflects off the surface, right? Or like the textures of a material, or how this material would look in like daylight versus like nighttime, and all these things that are details that might be very costly, I think, to explore in a mock-up or like a large scale fabrication. But through computer graphics, it's quite easy to generate.
Yeah.
So I think it provides definitely value to the process. I think anything that allows us to help someone understand an idea is a bonus. And I think like, not just architects, but we also work, with our clients, we work with, community members, we work with the public. And it's really about like being able to create like a shortcut to it's a visual shortcut for them to understand an
Yeah.
idea, right? And like
Yeah.
it's very much so, especially if someone might not necessarily have the right language or necessarily the training to understand something through drawing, but they see something and they know, maybe they know how to react to it. They're not
Hmm.
sure what provokes it, but they could be like, I feel like this isn't right.
Yeah.
But until you see it, you don't necessarily like have that thought in the first place. So I think
Yeah.
it's kind of up to us, at least right now, to be able to provide these tools for people to like have these conversations.
Yeah. I think you put it really well. It's also like kind of like this great bridge between intention and fabrication, right? Um,
Yeah. And I think it's like, we always say like measure twice, cut once.
mm,
So it's like if you can go to like your contractors and your fabricators and be like, this is exactly what I want.
yeah.
Like this is exactly what I want. Like I went to the manufacturer, I found the sample, we tested it a million times. We know this is gonna be like accurate. Like we ran it through like proper like rendering and lighting settings and everything. This is gonna look like this, right?
Yeah.
And then it makes things easier because they're not questioning like it's not like the old sketch, like you give them a sketch and they're like trying to interpret your ideas, right? They're like,
Hmm.
okay, this is easy. All I have to do is just follow the instructions, right? It's like the
Yeah.
IKEA method of like, let's just make sure things are right. And I'm going to give you all the tools possible to make sure that it's correct.
Yeah. 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 So I want to talk to you about being the director of a department. So you said for about 12 years, you've been director of
Okay.
visualization and the team has grown. What do you enjoy about being about directing a department?
I think, um, I mean, it's first of all, it's like a really, really great team. Like I'm so lucky that like I have a team that also has continuity. So like, the next person down the line has been there for like 8, 9 years at this point, like 10, coming up on 10 years also. And so it's good to have people that like you can constantly work with who also have been through this process and have seen the office evolve. And like, you can talk to them and they can quickly understand what's going on. And they're like, great, I've got this. Don't worry. Like, you go deal with everything else. I think beyond just having this really great team that basically needs no handholding, like the best part is to be able to test different directions. And it
Mhm.
speaks a lot also, I think, to the strength of the management of the office, where, we do have a lot of freedom and liberty to explore ideas. I think it's very much like a bottom up office. So
Mhm.
usually what we do is we would test a lot of these ideas, and then like maybe something will stick and they're like, yeah, this is really great. Let's like take it further. But I think, the best privilege I have is to be able to be like, okay, let's tackle all these things, like to be able to choose directions to go in, to see what's out there, to have a position where I can become this sort of more fluid middle person between the design teams and my team, and to be able to work in such a capacity that I can both have technical like aspects of it and also creative aspects of it. And so, you as an art director know that it is very fulfilling, but also very challenging to be able to convey a vision,
Yeah.
that might not necessarily be just yourself, but a collaborative vision. So I've definitely enjoyed all those challenges. And also one thing that is super important to me, and I hope you agree, is the idea that like even if you're directing and you're kind of on that management level, that you're still involved like day to day to some level of production. And I think people are
Yeah.
very surprised when I tell them that. But I feel like it's so important to be
Yeah.
able to use the tools yourself and to see like the shortcomings of things, to see what works and what doesn't work, to be able to speak about something earnestly because it is a work that you have touched personally and you
Mhm.
aren't just telling other people what to do. And it really helps, like, at least for me to understand what's going on, and the challenges really. Like, it's like, we always have these sort of silly things like, oh, the program is like freezing or like,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
this
Yeah.
is just taking X hours longer because of you have to do this and have to use this plugin and then this one hasn't been updated and all these little things that kind of add to a timeline. And I think like being on the production side as well helps me also build a more, I guess, humane schedule for like and realistic schedule for like how we need to actually execute things. So
Yeah.
when I can go to teams, I'll be like, this actually takes this much time and it's a realistic timeline. So
Yeah. No, for sure. I totally agree. I think, over the years when I've had, um, the leader of the team or the department, whatever, totally has to understand the work that you're doing and ideally is doing it at the same time in some capacity because I mean, for one thing, you're going around, yeah, like you said, like helping problem solving, but you also got this overview that, like, also the best way to do it, and you also know all the new technology, and you understand what the design team needs, and I think it's such an interesting role where you're looking top down in terms of how can we get everyone to improve? And I mean, it's great when you have a team that you can trust and rely on because I suppose otherwise your job would be like 10 times harder.
yeah, and I also
Yeah.
think it's like if we know a team really well, then we can play to their strengths and advantages. So like
Yeah.
we like the team has we're getting to a point also, and we can talk about this further, where there's so much out there right now that
Mhm.
like you can't possibly as one person tackle every single bit. So like
In
the
terms of
origin of your
technology, you mean?
yeah, so
Yeah.
like the origin of your podcast as well, like talking about AI and talking about real time and all
Mm.
these different like app development and all these different tools, it's just not possible for one person to take care of. So luckily, everybody likes one different thing. So we're all able to
Yeah,
kind of
that's
like
great.
diversify and like find
Mm.
sort of our area of passion and really develop that. And then at some point share with a larger group and see how we can start integrating these tools into our workflow as well.
Mhm. How big is your team, the visualization at shop?
So the actual visualization team, barring myself, is 3 people. So it's very
Oh,
small.
Yeah.
But yeah, right now we have someone who's really looking into AI. We have someone who's looking into real time. And you've been to some of the talks previously where we have an amazing illustrator who does hand sketches. So, we try to
Yes.
really cover the whole
Yeah.
gamut of tools that are available. And I never want to discount what came before, right? And so we
Yeah.
also have a separate team in the office called the interactive visualization team. And so that it's also a little complicated because there's also data visualization in the office
Oh,
as well.
yes, I see.
But the interactive team, I would say, is kind of our companion team. So they're doing a lot more of real-time visualization that speaks to the building process. It might not necessarily be the shiniest image, but it's really about understanding systems. They're creating more pragmatic tools, closer to what I was speaking about earlier for construction,
Mhm.
and for people to really understand how these building systems come together. And they're also doing a lot more of the app development and the back end of a lot of what we're doing. So, for instance, if we're working on like a real time project in Unreal Engine, you know, my team might be the ones doing the texturing, the lighting, all the materials, doing the modeling. And then they're coming in the background and making sure things like run. And like, if you walk past the door opens and doing like all the blueprint work.
Yeah.
Um, so it's really a fruitful partnership. Like we're constantly talking, we're constantly like collaborating on the same project. And I think we often face like the same challenges when it comes to, working on short-term deadlines and like
Mm.
those turnarounds like with the design teams. But they're very much, I think, part of the conversation of like where I think visualization in general is heading because, 10 years ago, 12 years ago, we wouldn't have a team like this. And now I think it's almost critical to have people who are kind of versed in building these sort of interactions and taking visualization to that next level. Because
Yeah.
for a long time, we're always talking about image, right? And now it's especially with all the tools we have, like you can move through that image. It's
Yeah.
no longer about something that's fixed. It becomes a sort of like custom journey you can take through a project. And so they're paramount to like providing all the work that like goes behind crafting something like this.
Yeah. And that's great. It's great that Shop have embraced real-time technology so early on because you use it quite a lot, don't you?
Yeah.
Um, and I think real-time, just generally visual visualizing things in real time for architecture makes so much sense. And I saw that early on as they were making it, and I feel like I think it's great any studio or firm who has, latched onto that quite quickly and realized that this is amazing. So tell me some of the tools. I know you already mentioned like so Unreal Engine and some of the other things, but like what tools do you use in real time?
I feel like there's like it's more like what tools don't we use? There's so
Yeah.
many. But I think like, we still for the core, the bread and butter that we do, we're still using like mostly a Rhino slash Revit workflow into 3ds Max with V-Ray
Hmm.
for all our rendering work because the design teams tend to work in Rhino. And I am really happy because we do have like a sort of visual forward kind of process in the office. So like beyond just our visualization team, most designers in the office. So that's, we have about 120 people. So maybe like 80 designers also know how to use like one of the more kind of easy to like get into visualization tools. So like either I would say it's mostly Enscape at this point for them.
Hmm.
Um, and then like, Twinmotion and Lumion. I know like most of our landscape architects also use Lumion. So we need to have some understanding of that.
Yeah.
Um, because that kind of provides like really quick kind of real time simulations, right? And animations. And even for us, they can provide basically an idea like of what they want to produce, and then we kind of produce the high quality versions of those things.
Yeah.
And then in terms of like our workflow, like you said, we use a lot of Unreal Engine, and especially now because we're moving more towards using adopting pixel streaming. So that
Hmm.
way, you don't necessarily need to have like a super power computer as like the consumer. So we would provide that service either in house or through some like a third party like AWS.
Mhm.
But you could just like take out your iPad or you can take out your phone and you can walk through this like super graphics intensive like Unreal scene. So we've been trying to push more towards that direction. And then the interactive team has developed an in-house application called Portal, and that basically is
Cool.
like a 3D database of like all our projects. So it's really speaking to the idea of like what we thought BIM was going to be like building information modeling, and
Yeah.
really having like all the metadata of a project like baked into the model itself. So they're using Unity for that. So
Right.
I think it's yeah. So I'm like not very familiar with it, but they use it, and I think a lot of the tools or like UI and design that's coming through for both sides are kind of influenced by each other. So, for instance, I think like a lot of people are getting comfortable using the joystick navigation for pixel streaming from the Unreal side. So then the interactive team would build in the same function for the Unity app because people are so used to using that, right?
Mhm.
So we're constantly trying to like bounce back and forth from one to another, to try to create like a more cohesive ecosystem of like tools in the office.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, at this point, like anything goes. I know, like especially with like the AI programs, like there's been definitely exploration with Stable Diffusion, because we wanted to play with something that was a little bit more, you know, like free and not necessarily like limited by a company, but also we played with Midjourney and Prom and all these other things as well. But
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
always, I
Yeah.
mean, it's endless right now. So
Yeah. Yeah.
we kind of
Yeah.
have to be selective about what we use.
Yeah. I mean, it's great if you can get a little bit of time on each thing at least, even to test it, because like you said, it's impossible. It's impossible for one person, but it's also impossible for a team while you're in production to be doing R&D on all these different tools. And then I guess you need to be working in such a way that, all the designers can also translate, like whatever they're doing can translate with you. So it's great when you can be flexible, and it's sometimes
Yeah,
like
and
a
I
bit
think
hard, I guess.
Yeah, and I think we want to be like really like tech agnostic because these
Yeah.
things like change so quickly. I mean, even just from one version of one software to the next version, it might completely change. And so like I think what's most important is retaining this idea of like critical thinking and creativity and really understanding. And I know this is a bit of a cliche that like, a tool is just a tool, but you're executing these tools to like it really shouldn't matter what you're using in the end if you just want to convey your idea because you should be able to do it through all of these things. And so, like, it's been a constant learning process for us in terms of picking up a lot of this stuff. But at the end of the day, it's all about okay, what do we want to convey? What's our main idea, and what's the best way to represent it? And like sometimes maybe we don't need like a full walkthrough. Maybe we can just do it with the sketch. And so I think like
Hmm.
one thing is always to make sure that like just because we're moving towards the future, to never like forget where we came from and
Yeah.
to never forget that we have those tools and they still exist and that we should be able to like switch back and forth. And sometimes you just have a sketch and a diagram and that's enough
Yeah.
that you need for the idea at this point in time.
Yeah, I've recently discovered how much people still really love sketches, and I think it's awesome because, on a personal note, like I love sketching. It's not something I've ever done professionally, but it's nice to know that these things don't get dropped. I don't think people see new technology and just never want to see a drawing again. I think people maybe even because they see them less, they're kind of, have this. I don't know. Some people think of it as a romantic idea, but I think it's also just this beautiful art form that people appreciate still, and like painting and stuff as well. That's
Yeah.
nice to keep that as a possibility.
Yeah. I think it's just like, I mean, also just for efficiency's sake, right? Like, it's just like,
Mm,
if you want to just have your idea come through, right? Sometimes you just need to draw those lines and then that's it. But
yeah,
also, like you said, it's an art form. And I think sometimes we also look at what the project we're working on is and who our client is and what they're going to react best to. Because let's say like it's something that they will want more ownership over. in terms of, let's say, like program of a space, right? And you don't want to necessarily give them like a full photorealistic space where you've imagined everything for them. You've
Hmm.
designed every single thing. They have absolutely no freedom over like changing anything because it just
Yeah.
feels so fixed. You can just give them an idea, right? And I think like
Yeah.
the kind of power of drawing and of these sketches is that it allows you to like invoke things rather than necessarily like spell things out directly for you.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I
Mhm.
found that with real time as well, you know. I've been using Twin Motion a bit more recently, um, and having things which is just like, you know, it's so much easier to use on the go. But not having photoreal visualization, I can see how people really appreciate like not having
Yeah,
everything
exactly. I
realized.
mean,
Yeah.
yeah, just like calling back to like the material thing earlier, right? Like, when I
Mm,
talked about like sometimes it is really helpful to have like the exact material that you want to show. But then,
mm.
like, if you do that like earlier, and this has happened where we do it like if it's too early in the project and they're like, oh, no, 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 like, and they don't understand this is like a placeholder. They're like, yeah, but you're
Mm.
showing me this. So are you
Yes,
saying
now
you
we have
want
to
it
talk
to be
about it.
this?
Yeah.
Yeah, now we have to talk about it. And it's like, no, this is like not what the presentation was supposed to be about.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's like good to like also anticipate like when these scenarios might occur and be like, okay, so we just keep it vague.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Let's talk about the NVIDIA's RTX program that you're really involved in. Can you tell me something about it?
Yeah, so it's I can't tell you too much about it, but it's basically it's really fun. We've been kind of involved with them for a few years at this point,
So
so
the RTX is the NVIDIA graphics
it's
card, right?
it's the graphics card program. So it's like it has nothing to do with like Omniverse. It doesn't have to do with all their AI work. It's specifically with the graphics card line. And so we've been really lucky enough to be able to beta test a lot of their products beforehand, and like find ways to break it.
Mm,
And so yeah, so we've been collaborating a lot with them to just kind of work through all of these sort of like technical issues, to test new things on it. I think like maybe we're also a little bit spoiled at this point because we have like cutting edge and then we forget that like maybe AWS won't have that. And then we try to pixel stream something and then the quality is different. But it's really been like a blessing to be able to like test all these new things and see what's potentially possible, a year down the line for everybody to be able to like have that sort of level of graphic quality. And I think especially as we're moving more into real time and AI calculation, it's like definitely a perk to have to be able to test these things. And
yeah.
because especially with the AI work, it's like very, very, especially if you're running all the simulations yourself, it's super, super intensive. So that's been really helpful. And even with Unreal Engine now with like the Lumen system and Nanite, it's been a little bit easier to be able to process things. But if you're getting like really, really complicated shader effects and things like this,
Mm,
it's been a huge help. So we're
yeah.
constantly just trying to provide feedback for them so they can kind of react to it. But I somehow find a way to like break every single product. And they're like,
I was gonna say it's like
how is
must
this
be
even
really nice.
happening?
You
Yeah,
just
they're
bring a
like,
whole
how is it
city
even
in.
happening? Yeah, like how is like how is your computer freezing already? Like, this is like the latest and greatest. Like, but yeah, it's been a lot of fun and definitely it helps us, really push the boundaries of what can be possible with 3D software. Like you mentioned, like you can bring a whole city in at this point. And like it really, I mean, that's always the exciting part, right? With programs like this,
Mm,
is that it kind of encourages us, myself, and especially to like really push towards that future and just
yeah.
see like what's out there, what's possible, like how much more can I do, right? Given the tools that I have. And because I feel like a lot of the limitations are by, what we have with software and hardware and not necessarily imagination. Right?
Yeah, it's nice not to
Yeah.
have that limitation too, because if you have a partnership with NVIDIA, I guess then you know, since you're helping them test it out, you get to try the most powerful stuff. Therefore, you're using the most powerful thing rather than, you know, we're not going to buy another graphics card, so we can't, this is our limit at this point. It's great not to
Yeah,
have that,
yeah.
I
And I
suppose.
think yeah, and I think like especially like some of the stuff that we're doing, I forgot to mention because I just don't work on it directly, but we also use CATIA at the office.
What's that?
And so that's mostly used in aerospace for and for kind of car automobile manufacturing to
Mhm.
do detailed models so that like let's just say you can go all the way down to the screw.
Mm.
And so like a lot of that modeling is like super intensive. A lot of that requires like heavier kind of translation into graphics, a better graphics card. So we're trying to always like push things in that regard. So I mean I'll get a CATIA model and it has like that's been converted into Rhino or something. And I just hope, the car can handle it.
I see.
Because we're getting that to that level of detail. But eventually it'd be nice and I spoke a little bit about this recently as well. It's like, we want this model that encompasses everything, right? It's,
Hmm.
before we would have like the drawing set or like the Revit model, and then we have like maybe like a simplified model for just for visualization. But wouldn't it be great if we can just combine everything together and we're using the same thing for everyone and we're talking the same
Yes.
language and we're sharing the same resources and like, what you get for visualization is what's going to go to like the contractor at the end. So like we're
Hmm.
constantly trying to find ways to use technology to like make that a reality, I guess.
Yeah, yeah,
Cool.
that's I think I totally understand what you mean. I think that's a really good and it's great that you have that overview too. Let's talk about 3D NY. So you've been a co-organizer pretty much since it started in New York.
Yeah, you're there too.
Something we do together.
Yeah.
Yeah, and like you also take part in a lot of social and speaking events in the archivist community. Like, is community important to you?
Oh, it is very important to me. I feel like I wouldn't be where I am today without, having this community. And I feel like, especially as someone who's in house and I've only worked in house, I've never worked for a visualization studio, we tend to get siloed a little bit. And I think
Mhm.
coming from an architecture background, working in house, I feel like we would maybe have more in common with the architect side and not necessarily the wider visualization community. And so for a very long time, that was the scenario. And then in around like about like 2016, 2017, we started going to more events abroad. And you know this too, but like for instance, in London, there's a really, really huge community. I think like basically everybody knows each other from
Yeah.
all the different studios. And also, some of the really major conferences only happen in Europe. So, especially around that time. So, you have D2 in Vienna, and then you had State of Art Academy in Venice. And those things, I think, were for a long time, like, out of reach for us. And then once we
Yeah.
started going to these things, it was just so good to be able to like share resources and like meet all these people and like have that support and like have this sort of understanding like hey we're all doing the same thing here, we're going through the same challenges, and it's like okay, I'm looking at something you're also looking at, like this is good, there's like alignment, there's synergy of things. And it was really a nice way to like get excited about it
Yeah.
and get excited about what I do and see like what the potentials are for like what else is out there, right? And so and then we came back to New York, right? And like for a long time we didn't have that many offices in New York that were doing this. So even
Yeah.
sometimes when like shop is working with the studio, it might be someone from like, Europe rather than local. So it was like we were kind of all scattered, and I think maybe you were also feeling the same way when you were at Shimahara, and even now it's just this idea that like we're kind of in our own bubbles. And
Yeah.
so yeah, so I joined, so it was like James and Nikos and then Kim Lee from Fuse FX and VFX. And so then Nikos left and they're like, hey, like,
Mhm.
do you want to come abroad? I'm like, yeah, yeah, sure. Like this will be really fun. And I got to like meet everybody. And I think it's like we took a break for the pandemic.
Yeah.
And then we started back up again. And I think like since then it's really evolved, right? And I think like
Yeah.
3D New York at the beginning was specifically like ArcViz. And so we always had the ArcViz studios, and then we made sure to tailor the content to specifically ArcViz. And then I think like we started opening up a little bit, right? We really
Yeah.
started looking at it as like if it's 3D New York, you know, who is to say that it only has to be about ArcViz? And I feel like especially working at the company I am, where we're always pulling inspiration from other industries, like whether it's gaming with all the real time work or aerospace with like some of our assembly and manufacturing processes. It was really important for us to have like that larger conversation. And I think especially because we're kind of all coming to like that same point, like we're all using the same tools now, right? Like everybody is kind of like real time. So, even if you look at what like Disney is doing with the volume, it's basically a lot of the same systems that we're maybe using in
Yeah.
the office, except they have billions of dollars anyway.
Yeah.
But we can start to have the same conversation with people that we might not be able to before. And so that's super exciting. And I think like,
Yeah.
since we brought it back, we've had a lot of people also not necessarily from ArcViz, like we've had people from motion graphics, people from industrial design, also NSXR, like, VR and AR people come by. And so it's like we need to start including these people in that larger conversation. And like hopefully we will also gain something from it.
Yeah.
So it's like super thriving, like makes me so happy that we have this thing.
Yeah.
So I
And
feel
shout
like
out to Elizabeth and Derek who
yeah, our
are
wonderful
co-organizers.
teammates. Yeah, they're really, really great. And I feel like it's definitely a passion project, I think, for all of us.
Yeah.
But and I see another event and I'm like, okay, like I want to go and see what's going on and what they're doing. And maybe there's something like we can take away from what they're doing that they're doing right and better than us. And like how can we incorporate that into our event? How do we help spread the word also like of what we're doing? And maybe there's opportunities to collaborate because I think like what's most important is being able to build this culture of like collaboration because we don't all exist in a vacuum. Like a lot of especially architecture, it's so many people involved in a project. No building is done by one single person, that we need to make sure that we have this network to like rely upon. And I think especially now, we're kind of at this inflection point of things changing potentially very, very quickly. Like I want to make sure that like there is this network that's available like for people to be like, hey, like I don't really know what to do and what direction can I go in? And like maybe in the future it's not ArcViz anymore. Maybe it's something completely different. But like we
Yeah.
just want to make sure people are exposed to it. Like I want to be exposed to it and I want to
Yeah.
know like what's going on and like where I could potentially pivot or like bring things into my day-to-day work. And everything's very exciting. So I feel
Yeah.
like I just go to everything I can because it's just so fun.
Yeah, I mean I love that. I love the energy, I love the passion, and I think that that kind of like a sort of community energy really enriches your work as well, because I found this too, when you look in different, like if you're just looking at visualization and you're looking at other visualization studios, for example, and you're just looking at that work, it can get very static in a way. And when things are being done just the way that they've always been done, and you don't think of any other way to do it. But 3D NY, whenever I've seen speakers who talk about something slightly different, other than architecture or ArcViz, it's been so exciting. I feel like I remember going to one where someone was talking about having an architecture blog on, I say blog, on Instagram, but like it's great, I think it was Architecture Hunter Instagram. And I
Yep.
thought that's a completely different area that is still associated with our field, that I found that fascinating. And then there's been like illustration and then like films and like fashion, and it's such a great, it really, as an artist, and I think we're all in some way artists, it really fills you up with different ideas, which you need to even just do your same job. Even if you're doing the same thing, you just need to have exposure from different places. So yeah, I mean, I've really enjoyed, I'm so happy that it was started just as I moved to New York, and I think I took it for granted in London because it was been there for a long time. And when I moved here, I think it started just after I moved, and I thought I'm so, like, I've met so many people, and I've met future employers from there and stuff, and so it's
Yeah,
great.
that's the thing. Like we've also, I think in the past, like brought in architects to speak at the event and you think like, oh, what's the value to bring an architect into just like a specifically like visualization event? But, we had really great conversations where they would talk about, how they would work with artists and like their kind of design process and how they would communicate. And then also it became on the flip side for them to be exposed to, maybe the contractors that they were working with, like the people that they were working with, and also opportunities to maybe get jobs. Because I think like that's something we don't necessarily talk about enough within all the different sorts of communities that are out there. It's like, especially for visualization, I think, it's very kind of cliche to just show like your portfolio,
Right,
but
exactly.
it's like how do we how do we make money from this, like,
Yeah.
if you're a freelancer, like how do you get work? And I think especially now, like our audience, it's super diverse. It's from all walks of life. We have a lot of people also who are coming, like who are still in school maybe, or like coming out of school and like looking for opportunities and like looking for a direction of where to go in. And I think it's like both, I think, sobering and also inspiring to be like, hey, like it is a lot of work, right? Like
Hmm.
for every 10 proposals we do, we might get nothing, we might get one, right? And it's like to
Hmm.
be able to like have these expectations in place and also have those sort of soft skills and tools available for you to like get that work is just as important as having like the technical capacity or talent to do something.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for an archviz artist starting out today?
It's really hard. Okay, maybe don't do art biz, but that aside, I think really try to like consume as much as you can and understand that this is a very rapidly shifting landscape of what it means to be an art biz artist. Um, I mean, I've also gone through so many different jobs before I landed in this place. And even this place that I am now is not the same place that I was 12 years ago, even though it's literally like same office, same position.
Yeah.
And I think it's, be flexible, like see what's out there. Even if it's an opportunity that doesn't necessarily feel right day one, if you have sort of the willpower, you have the resources, you can shape it into something that you might be proud of. I think always put your best foot forward. Even if the project is not really exciting, like make it exciting for yourself. And see it as something that maybe you'll be proud to speak about in like 12 years. But I think, yeah, it's always about just like seeing out what's out there and like staying open minded and yeah. I don't think I have anything else to add to that.
That's great. That's great. That's great advice. I think I definitely second all of that. And yeah, I know it can be hard, at the moment for people looking for work. And I think staying open is a really big, open and flexible is a really big thing.
Yeah, I
Great
think like
advice.
for instance, yeah, like for us too, it's just like all the work that we're doing and all the tools we're exploring, it's just to really inform us what's out there. And again, we might not necessarily use everything, but we at least can be like, okay, we'll be able to stay relevant if we just keep going down this path, right? And like, AI is out there, and AI we should see as a way, I think, really to help enhance our process and supplement our process, but not necessarily replace our process, right? And
Yeah.
so, as long as you're always constantly evolving your process, it's never going to fully catch up. But I think it's good to like, stay open about these things and see where you can incorporate things and where you can bring new things in as well.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Mengyi. That's a really great place to end it. Thank you for coming on the podcast and sharing your massive wealth of knowledge and experience with us. Definitely me. And yeah, it's been great having you here. And thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.